November 11th, 2023, Veterans Day. Well, we've been looking at a lot of developments in the world, and I haven't really covered a whole lot on the Ukraine war lately, as the focus has been more on the Israeli expedition into Gaza to eradicate Hamas or do their best to do it, and a variety of other type of topics, including the U.S. election. But this video, I want to primarily focus on the Ukraine war and what's kind of been happening, and some of the side issues about it. One of the more interesting developments, I think, is the fact that General Zaluzhny, the chief of the Ukrainian army, has basically indicated that the war has basically come to a stalemate. That basically the big offensive failed by the standards of what it was expected to do, which was to do large damage to the Russian position. Not to say they didn't make some advances in some areas, and also Russia made some advances in other areas, but basically nothing decisive. Although I think the losses were disproportionate during that period on the Ukrainian side. Since then, the Russians have started launching their offensives, which of course have increased their casualty levels. But so at any rate, that was kind of an opinion. Apparently, it wasn't too well received in Kyiv by Zelensky and or somebody, because apparently the next thing that's notable was that a booby-trapped present was sent to his Zelensky's chief of staff for a birthday party, killing him, I think, and wounding his son, I believe. So, because that is the chief of staff. So that seems to be sending a rather pointed message to Zelensky that you're kind of deviating into dangerous territory there. See, not much different than the way they do things in Russia, is it? That's been one of the points I've been making all along, that this Ukrainian outfit is not some kind of good guys versus the Russian bad guys. They're just two different guys, if you will, or two different gangs, if you will, two different countries. And they operate much the same way. And at any rate, so I don't know what's going to happen. I think there's an ongoing debate about whether or not there's going to be a presidential election or not. Perhaps Zelensky isn't exactly confident he would win if there's a fair election. Of course, who's going to run against him? I guess there may be some ideas to deter anybody from trying to do that, perhaps, just as we found out in the Russian election with Navalny, right? Who's now got a 15-year sentence or something like that for some kind of a charge that they'd come up with. So anyhow, so that's and that kind of confirms my assessment too, largely because the kind of warfare that's evolved with all these drones and everything is very static. And to actually successfully conduct an offensive, you have to be able to accumulate a very large preponderance of force and be prepared to take massive casualties to achieve your goal. I mean, if you really did have a real advantage in numbers and were really willing to take horrific casualties, you could probably win in spite of that. I mean, if you lose 2/3 of your troops, but you have 3 times what you need, you conceivably could still take the objective and have enough left to hold it when you got there. But that's generally not the case. These forces are more closer to evenly matched than that. Maybe not evenly, but closer to it, to the point that that's not what usually happens. One thing I haven't talked about at all, and even my previous videos, which has been developing all along, I'm still a little unclear what its significance is that in the Kherson region, which is to the south and to the west of the areas where the Russians occupy, the Ukrainians have deployed 4 of their Marine brigades there, along with some more territorial units that have been there all along, and they're beginning to conduct cross-river operations to establish footholds on the Russian-occupied side. And there's also one aspect of that is the fact that the Ukrainian side of the river, is on the high ground compared to the Russian side, which means that they have an advantage when you're right on the river line. And so the power from various weaponry coming down on the Russian side makes it very difficult for them to operate in that area. So once the Ukrainians cross on boats and so forth with Marines and dig in, it becomes very difficult to counterattack. Now, all along and for the last several months, the Russians have been bombing the area pretty heavily, I guess, to sort of slow this process up, and bombing on the Ukrainian side as well. The question I have on that is this more of a political op, or is this more of an actual major offensive? Because I don't know, once you get past the area where this high ground is relevant, will they be able to really do anything significant? What they will be able to do is inflict some losses on the Russians, and they will also be able to tie down troops that could be used elsewhere. And so I think that's what's been going on. I think that I know that they've changed the commander in the area recently and brought in a senior officer who'd been doing a lot of the the command of the forces on the Bakhmut front. I think for some time. So apparently this presumably is a more capable general. So we'll see what happens there. But that's one aspect. The Russian offensive at Advika is ongoing. Everybody, essentially, it looks like the Ukrainians have poured a lot of extra troops into it, and the Russians are slowly grinding away, but it is just like Bakhmut, one of those kind of meat grinder actions. One would tend to think that eventually the Russians will succeed in taking it, because they are slowly but surely closing in on the supply routes. But this may take some time. In other areas, there's renewed offensives down in Robotina and that salient to the east of there. That's been their main offensive area all along for the Ukraine, and that's ongoing. The other factor we're beginning to see is a lot of drone usage. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe if you haven't, and of course you can click the bell for notifications. Yeah, again, the drones have become pretty significant, both in Kherson and in fact all over the place. This is a major air support factor in this kind of conflict. And apparently one of the most effective weapons against drones is electronic warfare. If you can jam the signals of the controllers of these drones and can make them ineffective. And apparently in some of the regions recently, the Ukrainians seem to be doing a little bit better in electronic warfare than they had earlier, and maybe are even outdoing the Russians there. Because when you see some of the videos of these attacks, like some of the Russian attacks, you'll see that there's a lot of interference in the picture at times. And so that is, and of course the electronic warfare equipment itself becomes a primary target for the other side, of course. So that's one thing that's been happening. Otherwise, I think that there are certainly areas where the Russians are still on the offensive, but again, it's a few hundred meters here and a few hundred meters there. They took the tree line here. The other guys destroyed a few tanks there. It seems like anybody that brings up a significant force immediately comes under incredibly destructive fire. So I think that the thing, I guess, if this Zelensky versus Zelensky battle is really growing up, it's hard to know what Zelensky's reaction to this is going to be. Will this cow him down and make him shut up and toe the line, or will he attempt to pull a coup against Zelensky, or will their notorious secret services simply remove Zelensky? That's one thing we don't know. It seems like there was some dispute for a while between whether the offensive should continue or not, and it's hard to know. Right now, it looks like the Ukrainians are still trying to do offensives, although, again, they're not too massive, and it's hard to know how ultimately significant they'll be. So anyway, that's kind of the situation. Stalemate, the normal stuff. I think the big strategic thing going on now that we're already approaching the middle of November, and I think the Russian elections are somewhere in the March time frame, I believe. So one might think at this point the Russians will remain relatively cautious and try to keep their casualties down um, until the election is over, so that I guess, and if Putin is reelected, then presumably he'll feel free to, take more aggressive action after that. I don't know, is there any real viable alternative to Putin running? And even if the person does, will they receive a nasty birthday present or something? So I don't know. It looks to me like for the moment Putin will remain in control, and it's hard to know. There is, on the other hand, there is a discussion that some time back that a lot of Russian troops are being trained with a projected deployment date of sometime in December, which is coming up pretty soon. And when the winter gets here and things freeze, is often the time when the Russians try to make some kind of maneuver. So there's possibilities that something like that, the offensives might ramp up at that time also. So those are two different alternatives, I think, is, wait for the election or do something in the winter time, maybe to see some success. The other factor is with the current political situation in the U.S. and the Congress. I mean, with a pending shutdown about the time this video will have its primary run, so to speak, we will be approaching the point where, we'll either go back under a continuing resolution or not. And there's a big battle going on between, the Senate side and the House side about whether or not to do a small appropriation relatively to support Israel, or to do a giant $106 billion one that would also have about 60 billion plus for Ukraine, and money to support Taiwan and Israel, and some stuff for the border. But But either bill is going to. I mean, the small bill, which took money from the Democrats' IRS tax plan, is threatened by a veto and probably won't get through the Senate anyhow. I thought, if you're going to try to do that, you just pass a clean bill, but go after one of the pet items from the Democrat agenda is probably not a way to get it through the Senate. So anyhow, what I'm saying is the Ukraine aid may be tied up for some time as they battle over this large $106 billion bill. There's a lot of aspects to it, between those that want aid for Israel, those that don't want aid for Israel, which is a very small group. Then you have people who don't want the aid for Ukraine, or want it to be constrained in some way. And then you have, of course, on the border, all that Biden wants is money to help process all the people through he's bringing in, whereas the Republicans want to make fundamental changes in border security. Complete the fence, change the law about asylum, and force the people to stay in Mexico until they can be processed, and things of that sort. So and if the Ukraine aid is tied up in this, while this battle may rage on for months, a lot of their aid will kind of dry up, and that may give an advantage to Russia, who's receiving a lot of artillery rounds from North Korea. So anyway, that's kind of the situation, and we'll have to see how that plays out. On the domestic political front, one thing is kind of floating here is that the mayor of New York seems to be coming under DOJ scrutiny now, largely because he's criticized all the illegal immigrants flowing into the country, and particularly into his city, and all the problems it's causing for his city. And now all of a sudden, the two-tier justice system, which usually would leave a person like him alone, is now sprung into action, and his electronic devices have been subpoenaed. And I think one of his fundraisers has been raided in an FBI raid. And one cannot doubt that this is really a way to suppress his complaints, rather than it's an objective enforcement of law. Not that he may not be involved in some corrupt practices, but probably most Democrat mayors are involved in some corrupt practices. The question is, does the FBI choose to investigate them or not? So that's another example of your two-tier justice system in action, and kind of the sort of thing I was addressing in my previous video. I don't know if it was that well received by everybody, because they didn't like the answer, I believe, but The latest information I've got is there's even another dirty trick item that Jack Smith, the special persecutor that's been assigned to Trump there, has come up with, which potentially will threaten his attorney-client privileges if he chooses to claim that his actions were based on attorney advice. And if he doesn't claim that, then he's essentially forced into a position so that he has to actually justify it directly before a judge that would really love to convict him, and a jury that would probably feels the same way. But at any rate, we'll see how that goes. At any rate, I'll wrap this one up for now. And of course, I'll put my backup channel, put this on my backup channel at Rumble, and which has the same address on rumble.com. And I urge people to, if they're on Rumble as well, to subscribe there too, because you never know what could happen on YouTube. And the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. Until next time.